if you're going to backdate everything 15 years, I mean, everyone's going to be in trouble. I mean, should we stop trusting Cisco? Should we strip Cisco out of every component we have?
It's the same.
I don't think there's been the same
sort
of allegations about Cisco.
I don't know. Snowden
off intellectual property. Oh, well, that's different. That's
but if you're going
to, isn't it?
Yeah. But if you're going to, but they were actively helping the NSA spy on people.
There's that. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. And I should note before I go any further, this is our official christening of our new studio down here in our new offices. We've got proper stands. We've got all the crinkly wallpaper.
No booze.
We've even had a bloke try and come in and say he claimed it as a meeting room.
Yeah.
No, we haven't got any bottles of JD. I think we do need some cupboards with assorted vice and clutter. We'll work on that. So hurrah for that. It only took us, a couple of months?
Yeah.
So there we are. Anyway, joined appropriately enough by the usual podders.
We've done one in here already, though, haven't we?
But we didn't have all these cool stands and
the
mics and all the full setup.
There was, there's a little.
We had the little thing in the
table.
and it kept picking up my fizzy water.
Yes.
Anyway, so now we got this, and I can have fizzy water all I want. Jamie can dick about with stuff as is his wont. So we got Ian and Jamie, obviously that's kind of redundantly saying as they've both been flagged up. And what we're going to talk about this week, we're recording this on a Thursday ahead of a big G8 summit that's going to happen where the main topic's going to be Trump and Chinese President Xi arguing. Xi Jinping. I just said Xi, is that all right?
Is that his first name or his second name?
I never know, to be honest. I never know which... And to be honest, I've asked Way about it, and he's explained it to me, and I still don't know.
No.
It won't stay in my head.
My guidance has come from Robert Clark in the past,
okay.
One of our freelancers, and I've never really trusted that either.
Well, when I've seen it written, I've seen him written President Xi rather than President Jinping or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I meant. So stop being pedantic. They're going to get together to thrash out this trade war they're having, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the sort of collateral damage of that trade war. Obviously, it's affecting Huawei, but it's affecting quite a few other people as well. And then also this week, a recurring theme has been sort of 5G virtue signaling from people like Huawei and Ericsson and Nokia, and everyone talking about how totally on top of 5G they are. So we're going to have a little review of all that. And then lastly, we might finish off with, I wrote a little thing about O2 thinking it's come up with a bright idea to help people out, get sort of value for money from their tariffs, but it looks like a fairly crude bit of self-promotion. So we'll thrash that one out. Okay, so the geopolitical stuff.
A reminder.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Pierre. And just a reminder, if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on SoundCloud or iTunes or lots of other stuff and vice versa. Good?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, so this geopolitical stuff. There have been quite a few stories. I'm trying to sort of aggregate them into sort of one. I'll tell you where I'm going to start off. I'm not going to talk about Huawei. I'm going to talk about some of the sort of litigation that's going on in the States. So basically, to summarize what's going on is that the Trump administration is basically using trade as a sort of proxy for a broader sort of geopolitical conflict with China. Now, firstly,
well, I mean, that's sort of like narrowing the stance quite a bit.
Well, it is. I was trying to have a brief summary of the situation, but by all means.
But I mean, he's using the power of the U.S. economy and the purchasing power, and the wealth of its citizens to leverage better trade agreements across the world. I mean, it's trying to do it with China, but it's already done it with Canada. He's getting success with with Mexico. He's trying to do it in Europe. I think it's just a Trump playbook.
Okay, I don't disagree with what you say, but I think it has a different complexion with China because with Canada, with things like the sort of NAFTA or whatever these trade agreements that he tried to renegotiate, he's not putting Canadian companies on this entity list. He's not banning US companies from trading with these Mexican or Canadian or whatever.
But that's
it's a lot more aggressive.
But that's just an escalation of the situation.
But quite a significant escalation.
Yeah, but I mean, they all started off with exactly the same thing, and it was tariffs, except Canada and Mexico bent to the will of the US before China did. So they might have got the bans in.
Okay.
I think it's just a very crude business strategy from Trump, and he just shows his sort of like naivety when it comes to international politics.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, and that's what I want to sort of lead into is, fair enough, you're saying it's just an escalation of a similar strategy, but as a result of that escalation, you've got US companies increasingly finding themselves in hot water, trying to navigate all these restrictions that have been put down. So there was a thing, FedEx, the courier company. Some journalist from PC Magazine in the UK tried to courier a Huawei smartphone to a colleague of his in the States, and obviously on the little docket they have to say what's in there, and FedEx, whatever FedEx little sort of local office received it, got so confused about what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do that they sent it back, and that led to sort of furore because the Chinese are going, what's going on here? And they started talking about their own entity list, which is this sort of shit list of companies that no one's allowed to do business with if they want to stay in the good
China
books.
has one as well.
Well, that's it.
Right.
So we've had the US entity list. They've come up with what was it? It's like unreliable companies list or something.
It sounds very Chinese.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there was rumours they were going to put FedEx on that, and then the FedEx chairman got the arsehole about it and is now suing the Department of Commerce for putting FedEx in this impossible situation of enforcing all these restrictions. So when it starts to become sort of litigious, then you can tell something's breaking. There was another story about chip makers like Intel and Micron using little loopholes to get around these export. Because this is a problem when you start using these tools to impose your political will, you get all this collateral damage. Your own companies are prevented from doing business, and they don't necessarily share your political objectives. So then they start pushing back.
Well, the companies exploiting loopholes, I think there was sort of some analyst commentary about that a little while before the New York Times came out with its story, that people like Neophotonics, for instance, and Lumentum, which are two of the components guys that supply Huawei, and they've been affected by this entity list move, were using operations they have in Japan and the UK to continue supplying Huawei.
Because then they say it's not manufactured in the US.
Yeah, there's a loophole that if it's not manufactured
exactly.
and you can claim that the IP doesn't generate in the US as well, then you're allowed to kind of carry on. Now, I don't know what the legal ramifications are. You can sort of maybe expect some kind of pushback in future. The US is going to say, well, hang on, maybe you can't carry on doing that. But speculation they are doing that to kind of continue supplying Huawei, and that's where it's been able to kind of get some of its components from while this has been going on.
Yeah, because their view is we want to just keep doing business and making money and getting our bonuses and being able to go on holiday.
Which would help them to say, as they were saying this week, that they haven't been affected by the trade ban as much as everybody makes out. They sort of declined to say where components were coming from or what the new chip suppliers are that they're using. They at a press conference I think it's in Shanghai where there's big trade shows going on. Yeah, they wouldn't answer questions on that, but
they had a lot of pre-prepared stuff. I was looking; they'd got about 3 or 4 press releases just along those lines.
Yeah.
Actually, which brings me to another thing that I just wrote up today. They came up with another. They've commissioned a white paper on the importance of intellectual property law. Now, the apparent premise for them writing this white paper is to point out how interconnected everyone is and how it's always played by the rules and how 5G is not really going to work without Huawei chipping in because it's got all these patents and it needs to be able to license them out to other people. And we should all just be one great big happy tech family. But at the same time, I mean, there was, we covered a report a few weeks ago that originally derived some of its material from a light reading story of about, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
That Huawei had apparently been caught stealing
snooping.
Snooping.
Yeah.
Okay,
they were snooping at a trade show on
that was it. Yeah.
Another company's stand, and sort of I think they were caught sort of trying to undo boxes and look at circuitry and stuff.
Do some
and
reverse
before
engineering.
My time at light reading.
I've seen that before at the Geneva Motor Show. There was like a Chinese guy at the Audi stand, and he was measuring the batteries in the chassis. Actually measuring and taking notes.
It's like, hello.
Like, you're supposed to just look.
If you're going to date back, if you're going to backdate everything 15 years, I mean, everyone's going to be in trouble. I mean, should we stop trusting Cisco? should we strip Cisco out of every component we have?
It's the same.
It's a good question. I don't think there's been the same sort of allegations about Cisco.
I don't know. Snowden
off intellectual property. Oh, well, that's different. That's
no. But if you're gonna,
isn't it?
Yeah. But if you're gonna, but they were actively helping the NSA spy on people.
There's that. Yeah.
So, but if you're gonna backdate all these accusations that far, surely you've got to take in absolutely everything into account. You can't just this is why bloody flat earthers are so annoying. They come to a conclusion and then they find evidence that supports it and ignores everything else.
Supports the narrative.
But the argument about the Snowden, NSA kind of using Cisco gear is not going to put an end to what's going on now, because
I think
the US would just go, well, it's us or them, isn't it? It's a kind of...
The only reason I brought up this stuff from 15 years ago is I just thought it was funny, that unprompted, that Huawei's come out with this press release and this white paper and this long sequence of statements going how squeaky clean they are when it comes to intellectual property. And it felt like the company doth protest too much.
Do you know what I think? I just don't think they're very... The trouble with Huawei is they kind of come out with these press releases and these statements, and they always leave themselves slightly exposed to further criticism when they do it. They're not very good sometimes at the PR game.
Right.
So that with all due respect to the PR people that we deal with on a regular basis, I don't think it's coming from them necessarily. But I mean, the bit I did catch sight of in the white paper was the stuff about how much they pay out in IP payment, in sort of royalty payments each year, and how much they actually collect. Yeah. So I think they were saying they've something like 7 billion paid out against 1 billion that they kind of derive. So there's
and they're stressing the interconnectedness.
And this is the big difference between them and, say, an Ericsson or a Nokia, where the IP payments are only going one way because they don't have big devices businesses.
Right.
They're not actually making. They're not actually making those payments. But the trouble with drawing attention to something like that is it kind of gives them they've just been pursuing a big kind of patents player in Chinese courts, InterDigital, which is quite a significant holder of patents in mobile communications.
Oh, there's been some legal aggro between them and Huawei, is there?
That's been going on for months.
Right.
There's
kind of missed that
in China.
So it's something to do with regionalising the standards, isn't it?
It's partly to do with it, but it's essentially down with the essential thing is they don't want to pay as much for patents as they are.
They want to regionalise the pricing of components.
And get the pricing down basically. And
they're
doing the same with Ericsson. So
I mean, Huawei's argument, you can see it. There's a logic to both sides of it. Huawei's argument is, smartphones are higher priced in Western Europe and they're lower priced in the Asian markets.
Yeah.
So we should pay less per component or less per.
So it should be as a proportion of the cost of the device rather than a standalone.
But then InterDigital's argument is, well, that would make an absolute cluster the entire situation, and it would just be a nightmare to do business. So you need global standards, not regional ones.
But the point is they have a sort of vested interest in trying to force down the payments they're making to other companies and to try and sort of show how important their own intellectual property is, because they're the only one of the big equipment makers that is in this situation of being a company that pays to use intellectual property but also collects payments for intellectual property. If you compare them to their two big equipment rivals, they're in a very different situation. So they have this sort of vested interest in trying to talk up the importance of their own IP and pay as little as possible for IP they're actually using. And they draw attention to these numbers in a white paper. It's sort of the word
crude.
Yeah, if you talk to people who are involved in the market who point this out, that they have a sort of vested interest in doing this, it's sort of, well, you look at the figures and it's kind of you've kind of shown why why you've got a vested interest in doing it, and it's kind of they don't really help their own cause sometimes.
Well, and the broader thing which I picked up on is just making this protestation. So let's go back with Jamie's point about these allegations being quite old, and I don't think they talk about their massive R&D spend, and I don't think anyone questions that they do a ton of their own R&D.
Yeah,
and that they own a ton of their own patents that have all been arrived at through totally legitimate. Proper means, but the sort of allegation that sticks is that they gave themselves a head start all those years ago. Now I don't know. I'll stress that I've got no evidence one way or the other, and I'm not making that allegation myself. I'm just noting that is an allegation that's been flying around the industry. So that's a problem, Jamie, and that's why I think bringing up historical stuff, for some people still has some relevance. Because they're still leaving a bad taste in their mouth that they think they gave themselves a sort of artificial head start.
Yeah,
Why do they think they gave
I
themselves
don't
a head
believe
start?
that because they got caught snooping ages ago
with IP, with sort of dodgy IP practices back in.
They're
20
saying
years ago.
that
This is the rumor.
They had their knuckles wrapped and then decided they needed to kind of be good citizens. And
no. Huawei's never admitted to having ever done that at all. In fact, the chief legal officer, made the point that they've never been caught, which I thought was a slightly nuanced point in itself, but there we go.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I don't believe that at all because, number one, if you turned around and said, oh, okay, they've got such a lead over a 3-year stretch because, because they've had this head start, yeah, fair enough. But the fact they've got a lead over a 15-year stretch, you got to question your own R&D capabilities if you can't catch up with someone over a 15-year period. You've got to look at the situation and say, are we spending money in the right places? So, I mean, okay, fine, if they got a head start, yes, they should be punished for that, although it's very difficult to punish them in this situation.
US is
and where does the head start come from? Where are they saying this?
Where they were taking photographs of. Are you paying attention or what?
No, I just don't get this.
When they were taking pictures of circuit boards to reverse manufacture. So they got.
But this is something they deny doing.
Yeah.
So where does it? So
but
they're denying that head start.
You know as well as the rest of us that those allegations
I don't understand this head start
around.
thing.
The allegations that back in the day, they got themselves off to a head start by getting hold of some intellectual property through dodgy means.
Right.
I mean, you're aware that those allegations...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I'm talking about, those allegations.
So they're denying that they got off to a head start by doing this. Right, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying that they were saying they had some kind of head start in the market for 5G or...
No.
But hypothetically, even if
they did, after a 15-year period, if someone hasn't caught up, you turn around and say, well, realistically, you've got to question your capabilities to do R&D.
Well, also, I think that, I mean, the certainly the light reading story on them going around taking photos, I'm not exactly sure what company it was that they were caught, but I don't know if it was a company that was critical in the sort of 4G, 5G value chain anyway. So
no, and that just got recycled because of that Wall Street Journal.
I think that's a bit silly, really. That.
Well, they talk about light reading. Ray did just write a story about them losing some little case in Texas. As well, the thing
that's happened in IP is that China's completely changed its strategy in telecom with IP because they started out trying to, back in the days of 3G, they actually tried to build their own standard. They tried to develop something called TD-SCDMA, which was a standard that was kind of produced within China, and they tried to set this up as something that would kind of take over global markets. They could sort of sell it into Africa, and eventually it would become a sort of de facto standard in the way that GSM and CDMA were, and it didn't work out. It didn't get any kind of traction at all outside China, really. And that prompted this, and a little bit of this went on in the early days of 4G with TD-LTE, which is sort of very much a sort of Chinese sort of focused sort of standard. And they've kind of realised that the way that they're going to kind of make an impact on the global stage is not to try and go alone and do this sort of Chinese, Chinese homegrown technologies route, but to actually play a part in a global standards market, but try and dominate it, try and be the big player, which again they kind of said in this white paper, we have 20% I think of 5G compared with 10% of 4G, the message being we're becoming a much bigger player on the kind of international stage when it comes to the main standards. So,
in terms of IP. Yeah, totally.
And just flooded the standards bodies with bodies, basically, pump huge amounts of money into R&D and try and, instead of trying to build your own thing, try and dominate an international standard. That's the strategy.
Okay. And presumably, well, I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons why they're getting so much pushback.
Yeah, well, I think the Americans are worried that obviously the future 5G standard includes a huge amount of Chinese intellectual property, which is why this has now become an issue with their name being added to the entity list. There's all this concern about going out and what does it mean for standards groups?
Yes,
if you're making intellectual property payments, does that,
is that doing business with them?
Some money is flowing into Huawei's coffers from technologies that are being developed by other companies, but the royalties are actually due to Huawei. Then is this, where are the dividing lines now that Huawei's on this entity list? What is acceptable and what isn't? And all these standards groups, besides the 3GPP, have apparently been writing letters trying to figure out what the how to proceed and whether they're allowed to kind of carry on working.
This is the problem. This is sort of the core thing that I started off with. I just reminded of another story I wrote earlier on this week. The headline: US reportedly thinking of banning any 5G that's even been made in China. So regardless of who made it. So if they become so hostile to anything that's had any connection with China, then why wouldn't that apply to patents if they're Chinese-owned patents? There's almost no limit to the contagion.
Yeah.
Is it anyone who's just had some Chinese food can't come into the US or something? It's just getting...
I mean, the issue about Ericsson and Nokia being asked to not make equipment for the US market in China but to use facilities elsewhere is not really to do with intellectual property, I'm guessing. I mean, that kind of gets back to this security argument, I suppose you could say, which is the thing that the US has been running around saying, China's Huawei's equipment is not something you can trust because the Chinese government could insert spyware in it and it can kind of snoop on your citizens. And the argument that Huawei's always come up with is, well, if that can happen with us, then why can't it happen with other equipment makers that use components that are assembled in China? And that immediately shines a spotlight
alluding to with Cisco,
Ericsson
they've had plenty of sort of
but
security vulnerabilities over the years.
Well, sure, but particularly Ericsson and Nokia, because they manufacture a lot of and assemble a lot of the stuff in China. So, and this gets back to this Bloomberg report that came out months ago about spyware being introduced into components in China that were going into products that eventually ended up being sold by such and such a company and used in American servers.
That's probably what that story about any gear that's even been made in China.
This is why I don't think they want.
I think it's just this for me. I mean, the whole thing is just completely ignorant of how international supply chains work nowadays. I mean, you can't do things without China. I mean, any component, any service, or any product which is made in China theoretically can be a vulnerability in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. We're not just talking about mission critical components, but once you're inside the security perimeter of an organization. If you're a clever enough hacker, you can penetrate it. You can cause some damage. I mean, there's a company called I can't remember what they called it. I spoke to them ages ago, and they said one of the big problems which no one's looking at is this sort of like infiltration by proxy. So what you do is you find a very niche supplier for a company like Ericsson, let's say it's their accounting software, and it's a very niche, small supplier, so you attack them. And once you're, because assumption is their security isn't going to be anywhere near as high as the main target. But once you've got into their system, you can use them as like a Trojan horse through official communication software updates to actually penetrate the main target. So realistically, just because Ericsson is doing business with the US and they're not manufacturing anything in China, there's absolutely no reason why a Swedish accountancy firm or accountancy software manufacturer couldn't be targeted by state-sponsored hackers. And that is how you penetrate the walls.
I guess the US point is, fair point, but that's not a reason not to be ultra cautious about China.
But this is the problem. When you target a single company, all you do is you pay so much attention to that one company in that one region, and you're not paying attention elsewhere.
Yeah, there's that.
If you do what the Germans are doing, and they're saying, right, we're going to set security mitigation standards at this level, and this is above everything that we have at the moment, and you're going to have to be certified. Every component, every service, and every product which you do, which goes into a German network, has to be certified by a German authority. And they say, doesn't matter who you are, absolutely everything. So you take the idea of targeting a single company or nation out of the equation, and you just set a risk mitigation level so high that it doesn't matter where the threat is coming from or the route that the threat is taking. You do your best to mitigate the threat completely, because it goes back to the old saying, nothing is 100% secure.
No, so that kind of gets us back to this, on the eve of the G8 summit.
20.
Is it?
I think it's a 20 this time.
G20, I think. Yeah.
Is it? Okay, my bad. I sworn I saw G8. Anyway, no, I think you're right. Actually, now I think about it, there's all sorts of random countries involved. G20 summit, where, I mean, to all intents and purposes, it's a G2 summit anyway, because it's all about US and China, really, isn't it?
Fundamentally, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, whatever we think about Trump's unorthodox ways, it feels like it's come to a bit of a head here, and they've got to get together, sit in a room, and just go, right, you know, see who blinks first. I don't know how it's going to play out, but at some stage, presumably Trump is expecting this to result in some kind of movement on the trade relationship between China and the US and the rest of the world. But then China's going to be like, you know, they're not going to want to be seen to concede anything.
The problem I see is how much damage is going to be done before they get to that point. Because, you know, international relations, the international economics, the telecommunications, the security industries, they're slow-moving beasts.
Yeah.
And Trump has got a very short-termist view on these sectors. So if he steers all of these sort of big oil tankers in one direction, you know, we're not going to see the damage of his consequences for 5, 6, 7 years. But at that point, he's going to be out of office because he's going to be timed out or voted out. So he doesn't give. You know, this is all about his ego.
Looks like
over the
he'll
next
probably
2
get
years.
another 4 years. I think smart money's on that, isn't it?
Yeah. But even so, that's like 6 years total.
Yeah.
And you know, how would you move in 7, 8 years, 10 years down the line when we're seeing the real damage which is done from these relationships? How do you reverse it all?
Yeah. Well, quite. And I suppose that's my core point is we're reaching a point now. There's a little while where I thought, fair enough, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. We've tried the softly diplomatic approach. That hasn't worked. And I had some time for Trump's bull in a china shop approach that sort of get their attention. You know, you see it's made what seemed to be certain advances in the North Korean situation, although it remains to be seen how permanent they are.
I don't think he made any advances.
Well, yeah, but you know, he got North and South Korea sort of crossing the border and
sort of
having a hug
Mickey Mouse
and all that
diplomacy.
Stuff. Yeah, probably. And then right now we've got a reasonably alarming situation brewing in Iran right now. But again, you know, this, who knows? Maybe this belligerence, that maybe there's certain parts of the world, especially countries that are run by dictators, where they only understand strength. You try softly diplomacy, and they just think you're weak. Maybe that's all they understand. But then the flip side of it is a very high risk, because then everyone tries to chest beat each other, and before you know it,
I don't see this moving towards concessions by China. Certainly,
it's hard to imagine that this G20 is going to.
I just see some sort of bifurcation happening. You know, what the sort of thing, but how it affects broader global trade, I don't know, because we don't write about that enough. But certainly the prospect of a more sort of balkanised telecom market, I think, is something that's very real right now.
Yeah. I just can't see any positives out of his actions so far. Even in the Iran thing, I mean, Christ, I mean, everything was fine until Trump got involved, and now we're on the brink of a bloody war with Iran.
I think his point. Well, I won't go off on that tangent too much, but his point was he didn't think everything was fine, which is why he messed with it. But anyway, that's not within our remit. Okay, so I guess it'd be interesting to sort of check back next week when we do the pod and see if there've been any useful announcements.
We can talk about it again more then. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we'd had at least a week off, Huawei, so I think that's fair enough.
Yeah.
And we'd had at least a week off 5G, so let's rectify that. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No. I mean, it's more than Huawei, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
So which is a segue into the 5G thing, because this is the same sort of issue, really, isn't it? It's related to anyway. What you're going to?
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say that we've written a bunch of stories, as have light reading, I presume. Just that there've been a lot of announcements to do with sort of 5G progress. Oh, by the way, actually, this is relevant to this one. We've had, like one thing you and I were chatting about earlier on, this comparison of who's got the most deal wins. And there are sort of three or four metrics they chuck out. So there's number of base stations shipped.
Yeah.
Like
there's only Samsung and Huawei that actually give that figure away.
Okay. Huawei's just come out 150 grand on that one. What's Samsung saying?
They haven't. I asked them this week, and they've not provided an update since their last update, which is about 53, I think.
And how long ago was that?
It was a few weeks ago.
Okay. I mean, so it could be up to about 70 or something.
Certain analyst firms still think in the first quarter they were the biggest
player.
Really?
Yeah.
A lot of it driven by South Korea.
Yeah, that's the only reason.
Which is obviously launched networks. So
they've gone mad for it.
I mean, I from speaking to a few people over the last sort of couple of weeks, they're still seen as a bit of a Mickey Mouse player on the international markets.
Yeah,
they're not seen as in the same league as Ericsson, Nokia.
Interesting, but I mean, presumably,
Huawei.
if like SK Telecom or KT or whoever have got decent 5G networks going, and a lot of it's Samsung gear, then isn't that a testament to the fact that they're not a Mickey Mouse player, that they're legit?
Well, they haven't launched any networks in North America where they're supplying as well.
Right.
So, what's the reason for that?
Yeah. Well, you tell me, Ian.
Well, I wouldn't want to say, but the only company that's providing every single 5G service that works in America at the moment is over Ericsson's equipment.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I'll give you a chance to go deeper into that because you've been doing some great work on sort of digging down into that and chatting to the various people.
Well, if you go back, this relates to the metrics you were coming out with. So you've got shipments.
So we've got shipments, then we've got total deal wins.
Yeah.
And they're all in the sort of...
I'd say there were 4 metrics.
Yeah, so that's what I'm reading out. So we've got total deal wins, then we've got named deal wins, which tends to be about half the total deal wins. And Ericsson's about the most transparent on that because they've got a whole website.
Although they don't actually say total wins.
They don't say total deal wins, do they?
Wins.
They just have named deal wins. And then the final sort of prestige metric is live networks involving our gear.
Mm.
And I think Ericsson said 9, while Nokia said about 5.
Well, Nokia's now saying 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Has Huawei named live ones?
I asked them this week, and they said... Their PR guy said they prefer to leave that to the operators, and that goes for sort of naming live networks as well. You notice then they'll sort of talk about base station shipments, but they don't often. They do have press releases coming out saying we're doing this with so and so, but they don't have this page that Nokia and Ericsson have on their websites where they sort of.
Oh, has Nokia got a page now?
Nokia's not got like Ericsson's got a fancy little map with little blobs.
Yeah.
Nokia's just got a list, but it's got a list of companies.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Nokia,
because I think people said, "Oh, well, Nokia's not named any," so they went, "All right, we will."
Right. Well, and you could well have been instrumental in that because you've been prodding them a bit. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about some of the writing you've done on this stuff we're discussing?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the reason that they're all so desperate to sort of trumpet what they're doing in 5G is because it's an opportunity to build market share. Basically, whenever you have a switch from one generation of network technology to another, that's when you tend to see market share changes happening. So this is why they're also desperate to kind of talk about their customers and talk about what they're doing. It's, you go back to what was happening 3-4 years ago in 4G when it had already been around for a while, and it's all about upgrades, and there's not a lot happening in terms of customer movements from one vendor to another, for instance. Those things tend to happen when a new generation of technology comes along, and an operator might make the decision to go with a different vendor than it's before.
The time when they make major.
Classic example is 3UK in the UK, which used, I believe, Nokia to build its 3G network, then went with Samsung for 4G, and now has a deal with Huawei to build 5G networks.
Right.
So it's used different vendors throughout that process.
3's still just totally sticking with Huawei, is it?
Three's with Huawei on 5G. Three's 5G RAN deals with Huawei.
It's high risk, isn't it?
I'm talking about radio.
RAN.
Yeah. I mean, there's no 5G core anyway.
Nowhere near the mic, man.
Oh, sorry. Their core is Nokia.
Yeah, but there's no 5G core anyway at the moment. So.
No, but they're sort of beginning the work now. They're doing the pre-standard work now, but it is Nokia, and I think Cisco won, didn't they? Did they not win? Have they not got Thingabobs? Because that's something I was talking to about. When
Cisco does Vodafone.
Vodafone, that's the one.
Yeah.
Because that's something I was talking to someone about this week, was the idea of end-to-end. It started very fragmented, and then you went into sort of like 3G, 4G, and this is all consolidated, and then you started to see end-to-end solutions throughout the network.
We like
and
an
now
end-to-end
5G
solution.
is now turning away to best-in-class, for radio, for transmission,
Nokia,
as opposed to end-to-end, which is... Well, I don't know if that supports what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that best-in-class versus end-to-end argument's always going to kind of be there, but because you've got two opposing. I mean, Nokia makes a big deal about this end-to-end thing.
Yeah,
they just
they just talked about a deal in with Zain in
Saudi
so
their whole rationale for buying Alcatel-Lucent a few years ago was to have a broader portfolio and to be sort of an end-to-end player.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got operators increasingly talking about open networks, being able to bring in new suppliers quickly, being able to use a multitude of suppliers.
So
it's kind of two opposing things. And I asked Nokia's CEO about this, and he's like, well, end-to-end gives you, while they appreciate the open side of things, and they're certainly not one of the vendors that you could accuse of being less open than the others. In fact, probably more so than Ericsson and Huawei. They've been quite interested in getting involved in groups like TIP and the Open RAN Alliance, which are kind of groups pushing that side of things. But he said the end-to-end stuff, it gives you ways of optimizing the network in a way that a sort of company focused on one area wouldn't understand. So Ericsson has this RAN focus, and Nokia's argument would be, well, they don't really understand the optical side of things. And because we do understand the optical side of things, we're able to kind of make changes on our radio products to suit that. Yeah. And obviously, if you buy it all from us, it's going to be functional.
Does that make sense technologically, or is it just
I think it does make sense. They have a knowledge of how radio performance affects other bits of the network. So they understand how the radio might affect the transmission network, the optical network, and they can sort of tailor products to do with that. But the other thing is, it gives you, I mean, the term that Rajiv Suri comes out with is strategic mind share. So if you're going into, if you're visible in a contract for one sort of particular part of the network, then it just means you kind of have relevance. People get to know you. You have a relationship with the operator, and it sort of boosts your chances of winning 5G work as well. The other side of it, I suppose, is to have a narrow focus like Ericsson's very much gone after the radio access network side of things.
They kind of have to
sold other stuff off in the last few years.
Right, I see. Yeah.
They're really kind of concentrating on that. Pretty much all their R&D has been channeled into that area.
So they claim to be
have a focus on it. So
the other thing you got to take into account is the commercial side of it as well. If you buy end to end from someone, it's going to be a lot cheaper. Per unit, say per unit.
You can do deals, bundling deals,
as opposed to buying individual components along every part of the network.
Definitely, yeah.
So there was one other thing. I'd never heard of this analyst outfit called Global Data, but they've come up with.
Oh, they're quite well known. Global Data, yeah.
Again, I'm just showing that I'm my job, but that's fine. I made my peace with that a long time ago. They came out with.
You know nothing, Scabachena.
Yes. By the way, audience, you should note that Pierre's just binge watched the entirety of Game of Thrones from series 1.
The day.
Well, we have to talk about this afterwards because
you just did it. You did it in like a month or something, didn't you? So that's why you keep hearing these little Gallic Game of Thrones references from off camera. So they came up with a sort of competitive landscape assessment, they said, of the 5G RAN vendor market. So that is Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia, ZTE, Samsung. Now, the metrics were just arbitrary. They were just like marks out of 5 according to the following criteria: baseband capacity, radio unit portfolio, installation ease, and technology evolution.
It's quite qualitative, isn't it?
Very, I suppose it is, yeah.
I mean, I couldn't say whether someone's baseband unit is better than another one's baseband unit, really, but they probably know a lot more than I do about it.
If you couldn't, then I certainly couldn't. Can you imagine looking at a couple of baseband units going, I don't know, quite like this one. But the long and short of it is that Huawei got 5 out of 5 on everything.
Right.
And
they're supposed to be good.
Well, there we are. So according to Global Data, they are just better than everyone else. No one got less than 3 on anything.
Why do they call themselves Global Data if they're qualitative, not quantitative?
I think they do some. Yeah, I think
they probably do some number crunching as well.
They do sort of. I think they do kind of like country. They have some connection with Pyramid. Yeah, remember Pyramid?
Vaguely.
The Analyst House. I think they might be.
Oh yeah, I think I'd look because I hadn't heard of them. I look up and they seem to be a product of quite a lot of
acquisition. Yeah. They might have absorbed Pyramid at some point, and they certainly used to have country reports.
Yeah. But I just thought it was interesting. Basically, it looked like, as far as they're concerned, Huawei's a clear leader over everyone else. There's some areas I think, where Some people only got sort of 3 out of 10 on certain things.
3 out of 10?
Sorry, 3 out of 5.
Right.
I think the baseband capacity, Ericsson didn't do so well. Installation ease, I think Nokia didn't do so well, or something like that. Anyway, but it's, back to this sort of who's the best at 5G in terms of providers.
Yeah.
If we take that study literally, Huawei's still miles ahead of everyone else. Although, as I did point out, one criteria they could have had in there, back to the previous thing we were just talking about, is geopolitical matters.
Yeah.
It's all very well Huawei being the best, but if half the world won't touch them with a barge pole.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that despite all the chest thumping that's going on and contradictory messages, actually, because both Ericsson and Nokia have said in the last couple of weeks that they've taken market share from each other.
Yeah.
Which is obviously, the two of them can't be right. So if you talk to the analysts who track this in a very quantitative way, like Deloro, for instance, which I think is cited even by the vendors, they said there hasn't been much change in the kind of overall RAN market shares that the big players have. There's not really a lot of difference as far as they're concerned.
Okay.
Despite all this sort of rhetoric, but they're obviously keen to show that in 5G they are, that they're relevant and that they're kind of winning business and that they're not losing business.
If we weren't having all this aggro with Huawei, it makes you wonder whether they would have taken, if we take again global data to be gospel truth, maybe they would have nicked a bunch of market share if they're that much better, according to these qualitative criteria.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I suppose everybody's, and Jamie and I have talked about this a lot in the past on the pod, that the backlash against Huawei, you kind of think would have, a lot of analysts have been saying, well, this should be an opportunity for Ericsson and Nokia, and yet there's not a lot of sign of that at the moment.
I don't think anyone is going to be a big winner out of this, and I don't think it's going to be Nokia, and I don't think it's going to be Ericsson. I don't think they're going to gain a huge amount out of anything, because all I think this situation has demonstrated is that you need to diversify your supply chain more. So, I mean, okay, Huawei might not win, they might not lose, Ericsson, Nokia might not win and lose, but you might see a bit of a gain for ZTE, you might see a bit of a gain for Samsung. In the other parts of the network, you might see other challengers gain, because these guys have seen how tenuous and sort of strained the political situation is globally, and they don't want to overly rely on a single vendor.
Yeah, but then back to the sort of trade war thing. When you start restricting choice, then you take away companies' ability to do exactly what you just described.
Yeah, but I mean, like the winners, is it going to be Nokia and Ericsson that are going to win? Is it going to be Huawei, or is it going to be the little players who, these guys, the big players might marginally drop on market share, but all of a sudden, because of the drive to diversify, the smaller players become more relevant, and in the less sensitive areas of the network, I'm not saying they're going to slap a sort of a Samsung base station in the middle of Waterloo Station or anything like that, but in the less sensitive areas of the network where they can they can compensate, why not add a bit more variety
and players even smaller than that. I mean, this is an opportunity for this whole Open RAN thing, with new equipment vendors, people that have radios but haven't been like Fujitsu or someone like that. A lot of the guys that are working with companies like Rakuten, the kind of Japanese player that's building a network from scratch, so it doesn't have any of those legacy constraints. You look at the names; they're all startups or people like Altiostar. These names companies that we write about from time to time, but they're obviously not kind of big players in the way that an Ericsson is. I think this whole what's going on at the moment is an opportunity for those kinds of guys, certainly, because operators at the end of the day, they want competition in the vendor landscape, don't they? And and this has been, even before this kind of geopolitical thing was going on, the fact that the market's consolidated so much over the last few years, and you only have 3 massive players, is obviously going to drive you to try and look for alternatives, just to try and get competition into the market and get prices down. Totally.
Right, I think we're running out of time, so I just got one more little thing I wanted to bring up. We won't talk about it for too long. It's almost a sort of quirky. But I saw a press release from O2 UK yesterday that they've, I'll remind myself what they call it, that they've launched...
Tariff Buster.
Yeah, no, they called it Overpayment Estimator. So the context of O2 launching this thing is all UK MNOs have been getting grief from Ofcom to do better when it comes to especially the end of deals. So let's say you get a 2-year deal with a handset thrown in, you're paying 60 quid a month because it was an iPhone, and then you come to the end of it, and historically they'll just let you roll over, even though there's no way you should be paying 60 quid a month anymore, because at least half of that was just paying off the cost of the handset. And they'll let you roll over, and this is a typical utilities thing, this isn't unique to telecoms, energy suppliers will do this, they'll let you, or BT broadband or whatever, they'll let you stay on more pricey contracts rather than constantly letting you know how you could save money. And it's obvious why they would do it, because there's more margin if you're overpaying. Why would they deliberately offer to give you the same service for less? But regulators are saying, well, you've got to do that because it's out of order and you're ripping off your own customers. So it's got to the stage with mobile operators where they're all going, yeah, we'll be good from now on. And O2 seems to have been the first to sort of exploit this opportunity, i.e. it's doing what it's got to do anyway, but it's trying to make a virtue out of necessity by launching this thing called Overpayment Estimator. And I went on the site, and basically all it does is ask you, what phone have you got, how much are you paying for it, when does your contract end? And then it goes, ta-da, in 5 months' time, you could save 30 quid a month if you switch to O2. What they're really saying is, in 5 months' time, you could save 30 quid a month if you just renegotiate your contract with anyone, including your existing supplier. But they're trying to make it so that consumers they're trying to infer that they'll somehow get an extra special deal from O2. They might do. I don't know that they don't, but my gut feel is that no. They're just trying to make it easier for people to switch by offering this thing. They even let you press a button to create a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar reminder to get in touch with O2 as soon as it switches.
I had an interesting email just a couple of minutes ago, actually.
All right.
So it was from. No. I mean, it's my personal email.
Oh.
GiffGaff because I pay for 20 gigabytes a month on my contract, and it's only £25. So it's
similar
really,
to my
really good.
EU one.
And I go through it quite often because, I mean, especially in the last month. Well, firstly,
trade shows dodgy videos you watch.
Yeah, all those dodgy videos. Firstly, in my flat, where the router is, it's terrible for Wi-Fi across the length of the flat. So when I'm cooking, I can't actually watch anything on my phone or watch the instructional video or whatever. But also, I'm hot-spotting. I'm hot-spotting quite a lot at conferences, so I've been chewing through my data. And they've actually turned around and said they're going to double my allowance.
Okay, just arbitrarily?
Double my allowance. So,
great bloke.
Technically, it's...
So how much are you going to get?
No, I'm on unlimited data. Sorry, I said that wrong. So I'm on unlimited data, but they throttle it at 20 gigabytes.
Right.
So they are doubling the allowance
threshold
of full speed data.
So you're going to get 40 gigabytes before they throttle?
Yeah.
That's more than you'll need for the month.
Are they charging you anything for that?
Nope. Exactly the same.
So this is GiffGaff, which is an O2, we should point out, subsidiary, isn't it? Basically,
yeah. But 3 added a gig to mine just for no reason.
That's I mean, every month if I'm running
20% bump.
I'm gonna go to GiffGaff.
Every time if I'm running short with about a week to go, they just decide to go. Okay, you look like you're not going to get to the end of the month. Have another gigabyte less.
And coverage is good and everything.
I've never had an issue, except when the network's just crashed.
Yeah.
I've never had an issue.
I think this sort of comes back to something we discussed before about sort of innovation, using BSS in a actually sort of customer centric way.
Yeah.
So I'll take the piss out of O2 a little bit because this initiative is a little bit sort of crude in my opinion. All they're basically saying is when your tariff runs out, if you don't renegotiate, you'll be overpaying, which duh. But still, fair play to them for giving it a go. But one point I made at the end of the story is, presumably, we know BSS, it's quite a big, sophisticated market. There presumably is the technology there for you to make a note at the start of someone's contract when it's going to end and remind them. So it's got to be willful. They've got to have deliberately not been reminding people.
Yeah.
It's not some technological failing. So for them to suddenly start trying to make a virtue out of no longer deliberately ripping people off, I don't get too excited about it. But then what you guys were just talking about with this just complimentary stuff, that's proper customer service. And it runs contrary to their instincts.
That's digital, that is.
No, but I mean, let's not forget what they've done. Like the O2 brand, I know this has nothing to do with OSS, BSS, but like the priority moments thing, I mean, that is... I mean, they're the biggest market shareholder for 4G in the UK. Yet E has the best network and 3 has the cheapest price.
Right.
Yet O2 was somehow
still got more.
Well, I think it probably is OSS BSS partly though. Their systems are just better than they can react to
but I'm
things
talking
on the
about this
customer
point I'm making. Yeah, no, it's
Okay.
not nice. Like the priority moments. It's like so much more. I mean, that's not OSS BSS. That is just value adds, experience, marketing. It's just very, very clever partnerships. And this is where you've got to give O2 a bit of a
cultural desire to add value.
Yeah. I think they're just a very well-run business.
Yeah.
They're okay. They could do better on signal. Whenever I go back to South Wales, it's shoddy around where I grew up.
Right.
I mean, there's no point in dressing it up. It's really in Cowbridge.
Yeah.
But London...
But the other ones are as well, probably.
Yeah. No. E and Vodafone are really, really good.
What are you trying to say?
We are in a valley, but
appropriately enough.
But it's but the whole business is just really good. I think,
Well, that's it, and I think as a mindset, if they start trying to do more of these things and pleasantly surprise you by chucking you some extra allowance every now and then without you having to ask for it, without you having to be on some stupid customer service call for 4 hours, then that implies that they're turning a corner away from having this sort of very stodgy utility type of approach to customer service to actually having this digital
well, they need the systems to be able to do that, to be able to
Yeah.
react quickly. And this is one of the things I've always wondered about EE, when you get phone calls from them saying, have you considered upgrading your home broadband service?
Right.
Who are you using at the moment? Oh, I'm using BT. And they're like, and then you end up having a conversation with someone for ages about why you should switch from BT, even though it's the parent company. And it's sort of, surely with a proper interface there that shows him exactly what's going. He obviously needs to be briefed and know about the company background, but you'd think that they have something that's kind of sorting this kind of crap out. But it's just baffling that it's still going on, really. And it was going on recently that this happened to me a few days ago.
I mean, sticking with the innovation side of things, I mean, one thing that I picked up on this week, and I don't know whether the Light Reading reporter picked up, whoever wrote this story, was with the T-Mobile launch. And what they're doing, and I think this is a really...
T-Mobile in America.
Yeah, T-Mobile US, sorry.
We didn't mention that in our 5G segment, but they've finally gone live with their 5G.
They've gone live 6 cities across the States, but coverage is incredibly limited, as it is with every launch.
Yeah.
Irrelevant of where you
Few
are,
cities.
who you are. No, even in the cities, they've got a coverage map, and it's like, it's
patchy.
really patchy, and it's, small places and various different blocks.
You can get it in IHOP, but nowhere else.
But what they've...
International House of Pancakes.
What they've turned around and done and said is, right, okay, we're going to give you a chance to upgrade. Pay us $30-odd a month to upgrade your phone, and we'll give you 5G connectivity for free. So as long as you've got a 5G phone, you can have 5G connectivity for free. And I think it's a really clever idea.
So what if you buy the phone somewhere else?
Well, you still have to have a T-Mobile. Well, I mean, I'm assuming you still have to have a T-Mobile contract.
Yeah, but then they won't charge you more.
Maybe not.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I don't know how much the phone actually costs in total. I don't know if they're paying £30 a month. That's a number
crazy John Ledger.
Plucked out of my head. But I think this is a really clever idea, because how many people are charging a premium on 5G, even though it's got such limited coverage? So like they're turning around and saying, look, we can't do the whole 5G thing at the moment, but we can give you a little glimpse of the future and show you what it's going to be like, but we're not going to charge you anything as long as you've got the phone.
Yeah.
And I think that might steal some subs.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good Un-carrier move, and I think it might steal some subs.
Is now a good time to go SIM only with 5G coming along, or do you wait for 5G and then go SIM only? This is the question.
I'm SIM only.
Always the way to go.
Is it? Because then you've got to buy an expensive handset, though, haven't you, when you want to get your 5G phone?
You've always got to buy an expensive handset. It's just whether or not you want it financed, or whether you can find.
You've got that upfront fee, though, haven't you?
I mean, I haven't got a grand in my bank account.
It's just how you pay for it.
Just sell some Bitcoin, mate.
No, it's all right. No. I'm doing quite well at the moment, actually, so that's all right.
There we go. So you haven't got the grand in your bank account to pay for it?
No. It's tied up in stocks and shares at the moment.
But I used to do total cost of ownership calculations when I was a smartphone analyst, and you pay a massive premium for subsidised devices. Mm-hmm. A much smarter thing to do, even if you don't have the grand in your bank account, is just go off and get a personal loan for £1,000, paying 3-5% interest. You're going to be paying a lot less than you will by going for one of those subsidised things. Yeah. People just do it. They just want the instant gratification, and the phone companies make it easy. You just go in there and go, "Oh, look, shiny, just sign on the dotted line," and then you're shelling out 60 quid a month, 1,200 quid, and well, actually, it's more than that, isn't it? My maths let me down. More like 1,500 quid for a handset that might cost 800 quid. Granted, obviously you're getting a service contract in there, but you're probably getting far more data than you need. One of the ways in which they justify the premium is them giving you 100 gig a month, none of which you ever use. I was just looking at my son when I was walking to work, asked me to gift him some data. We were on EE, and you can do this gifting thing. And I had a little look. I can see mine and my wife's, and both of us still had like 18 gig left, and it refreshes in about a week.
Interesting.
Is that how much
Your
you get?
Teenage son, he's watching a lot of videos.
Yes, I know. Don't even get me started, mate. Hopefully not on his way to school, you know what I mean? So, yes. Okay, well, that seems like a good point on which to leave it, as we've banged on for about an hour. He might even be on the podcast because he's coming to do work experience in July.
Oh, let's embarrass him.
And you can ask him what he's doing with his dad's data.
Yeah, well, oh, God, that could get awkward. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. All right. Thanks a lot, guys, and thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.